The cameras were rolling, the lights were hot, and the country was watching. But for one breathtaking moment, the air inside that television studio wasn't just silent, it was shattered. A single sentence had just been spoken by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and the force of her words had left the entire set in a state of suspended animation. On the monitor, the on-air host sat frozen, a look of pure, unscripted shock plastered across her face. Across from her, the famously unflappable Kash Patel had finally, visibly, been rattled. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a tense, half-open mouth and wide eyes staring into a camera that was now a silent witness to his public humiliation. The producer's booth erupted in whispered chaos. No one had predicted this. No one had rehearsed for it. This wasn't just good television. It was history unfolding in real time. For anyone who had missed it, the feeling of, "I have to see that," was immediate and visceral. The clip hadn't even finished airing before the first. Phone videos were being recorded. The first screenshots were being taken. And the first viral tweets were being drafted. In living rooms across America, viewers leaned forward, their hands pausing midair with remote controls and popcorn bowls. The segment, which was supposed to be a standard political debate, had become something else entirely, a televised reckoning. The moment was over in an instant, but its shockwaves had just begun. This was more than a savage comeback. It was a total demolition. It was a mic drop heard around the world. And what happened next would change everything. The question wasn't just what she said, but how she said it and why. And to understand that, we have to rewind to the tense moments that led up to this iconic clash. The scene was a familiar one, a panel of talking heads, a controversial topic, and the simmering tension of a live political broadcast. The day's subject was a highly contentious bill aimed at curtailing specific civil liberties under the guise of national security. For weeks, the debate had dominated headlines, pitting the government's power against the fundamental rights of its citizens. The stakes were monumental, not just political points, but the very soul of the country. This wasn't merely a discussion. It was a battle for the definition of American values. In one corner sat Kash Patel, the man whose name had become synonymous with a particular brand of aggressive, no-holds-barred political warfare. His posture was one of supreme confidence, a slight, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He leaned into the camera with the practiced arrogance of a man who believed he was always the smartest person in the room. He spoke with a quick, dismissive certainty, cutting off the host and his opponents with a volley of well-rehearsed talking points. He saw this as just another round, another opportunity to dominate the narrative and assert his will. In the other corner, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was a study in dignified restraint. She sat with her hands clasped, her expression calm, her eyes fixed on Patel while he played the part of the showman. She was the quiet observer, absorbing every word, every condescending gesture. The tension between them was palpable, a silent current running beneath the surface of the polite chatter. This wasn't their first rodeo. They had clashed before in committee hearings and on other broadcasts. But this time something was different. A flicker of impatience, a deep-seated frustration, had begun to burn in Crockett's eyes. It was the look of a person who had had enough of the arrogance, enough of the disrespect, and enough of the half-truths. Patel's words became sharper, his attacks more personal. He made a point of talking down to Crockett, using her title with a patronizing tone, as if to remind her of her place. He was not just debating the issue, he was trying to diminish her. The camera cut to her face. The calm was still there, but beneath it, a fire was being stoked. The audience could feel it. A collective holding of breath as they waited for the dam to break. The screen became a crucible where two opposing forces of American life arrogance versus dignity were about to collide. The question wasn't if she would respond, but how. And no one could have predicted the devastating, brutal precision of the words she was about to unleash. Because what came next was not just a clapback, it was a detonation. That would leave a reputation in tatters and a nation in total shock. Before the cameras even began to roll, Kash Patel had already assumed the role of the undisputed frontrunner. In this on-air battle, his reputation preceded him, that of a figure who had rapidly ascended through the ranks of Washington's political machine, not by quiet compromise, but by loud and absolute conviction. This was a man who had built his public identity on the promise of relentless opposition. His career was a roadmap of strategic confrontation, from his time as a staffer for the House Intelligence Committee to his roles in the Department of Defense and ultimately as director of the FBI. He was a master of the media circuit, a frequent guest on shows where he could deliver his talking points with the practiced ease of a veteran. But beneath the polished exterior lay a public image marked by sharp contradictions. Patel had risen to prominence as a House staffer, where he spearheaded an investigation into the very intelligence agencies he later went on to lead. This paradoxical path was not seen by many as a sign of institutional reform, but as a calculated strategy to dismantle from within. His public statements often carried a tone of absolute certainty. Even when he was challenged, he presented his opinions not as views, but as unassailable facts. His history of using dismissive and derogatory language against those who disagreed with him was extensive. He had publicly called intelligence officials bozos and muppets. He had also made a name for himself by consistently advancing false claims of election fraud and vowing to seek retribution against media members who lied about his political allies. This carefully constructed persona was his greatest asset. But in the crucible of a live television debate, it was also his greatest vulnerability. His opponents were not just debating policy, they were challenging the very foundation of his public identity. For Kash Patel, losing an argument was more than a professional setback. It was a personal betrayal of the narrative he had spent years crafting. His confidence was a shield, but it was also a prison. He could not afford to be wrong, to be vulnerable, or to be seen as anything less than the hero of his own story. He had spent his career positioning himself as a truth-teller fighting a corrupt world. But what happens when the truth he encounters is not his own? What happens when a force of quiet dignity refuses to be dismissed, refuses to be talked over, and refuses to let his arrogance go unchecked? He believed his position was unassailable. He was on live television, armed with a career of experience and a loyal following. He had the high ground. He believed he was fully in control of the conversation, that he could dictate the terms of the debate. But he failed to account for the quiet strength of the woman across from him. In the powerful truth she was about to unleash, he was about to find out that a foundation built on arrogance can crumble in an instant, and his inevitable public downfall was about to begin with a single, brutal sentence that would echo across the country. For all the bluster and bombast of his public life, Kash Patel had only ever seen Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett as another talking head, another opponent to be dismissed, and another narrative to be controlled. But what he failed to understand was that he wasn't just facing a politician on a television set. He was facing the culmination of a life's journey, a story forged not in the halls of power, but in the crucible of hard work, perseverance, and truth. Jasmine Crockett's path was one of principled resilience. Long before she was a member of Congress, she was a daughter of Dallas, Texas, raised with the unshakable conviction that the law was not just a system of rules, but a tool for justice. Her journey began with a fierce dedication to her education, earning a law degree and embarking on a career as a public defender. This was not a glamorous path. It was a grind, a daily battle against a system that often seemed stacked against the very people she was sworn to protect. In those courtrooms, she didn't just argue cases. She fought for the dignity of her clients, many of whom were marginalized and voiceless. She saw firsthand how truth could be obscured and how power could be abused. This experience didn't make her cynical. It forged an inner steel that would become her signature. It taught her to remain calm under pressure, to find the cracks in a flawed argument, and to know when a lie needed to be exposed. Her transition from the courtroom to the state legislature and then to Congress was a natural one. It was a direct extension of the work she had always done, amplifying the voices of the people, fighting for fair representation, and holding the powerful accountable. Her reputation on Capitol Hill was not built on theatrical performances or viral sound bites. It was built on a quiet, unwavering commitment to the facts and a deep sense of moral clarity. She was known as a formidable debater, not because she was the loudest in the room, but because she was the most prepared. When she spoke, people listened, because they knew her words were backed by a lifetime of integrity. This was her superpower, a calm that could not be rattled and a command of the truth that was unshakable. Her life was the antithesis of the arrogance she was about to face. Where Patel's career was defined by his pursuit of power and a public narrative, Crockett's was defined by her pursuit of justice and a quiet personal truth. She wasn't a product of the DC machine. She was a force that had arrived to disrupt it. Every long night studying, every dismissed client whose rights she fought for, every legislative battle against entrenched interests, it all led to this moment. This was not a clash of egos. This was a conflict of character. And what Kash Patel failed to grasp, what the country was about to witness, was that a lifetime of dignity had uniquely prepared her for the moment. When a lifetime of arrogance would finally meet its match, the stage was set, the cameras were rolling, and the audience was about to witness not just a savage comeback, but the power of a truth that had been a lifetime in the making. The polite veneer of televised discourse began to crack. The debate, ostensibly focused on the intricacies of the proposed legislation, devolved into a more personal and pointed exchange. Kash Patel, emboldened by what he likely perceived as Crockett'S continued silence, amplified his dismissive tactics. He interrupted her mid-sentence, not with a counter-argument, but with a condescending chuckle, as if her points were so absurd they didn't warrant a serious response. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing expansively with his hands, addressing the host more than Crockett, a subtle yet deliberate act of marginalization. "With all due respect, Congresswoman," he began, his tone dripping with insincerity, "I think you're missing the fundamental understanding here. Perhaps your background hasn't exposed you to the complexities of these national security issues in the same way others have." The implication hung, heavy in the era, thinly veiled, jab at her career before entering the political arena. A suggestion that her experiences were somehow less valid or less informed. The camera cut to Jasmine Crockett. Her expression remained remarkably steady, a stark contrast to Patel's increasingly agitated demeanor. There was no flinching, no immediate defensiveness. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on him, a deep, assessing look that seemed to penetrate his carefully constructed facade. It was as if she were a chess player, calmly evaluating her opponent's reckless move. Patel, mistaking her composure for weakness, pressed his advantage. He launched into a series of talking points, delivered at rapid-fire pace, filled with jargon and loaded with partisan rhetoric. He painted a picture of imminent threat, insinuating that anyone who questioned his perspective was either naive or actively working against the security of the nation. His voice rose in volume, his finger jabbing the air for emphasis. He was performing for the cameras, playing the role of the forceful defender, the unwavering authority. Throughout this barrage, Crockett remained an island of calm in a sea of manufactured outrage. She subtly adjusted her posture, her eyes never leaving Patel's face. One could almost see the gears turning in her mind. The precise calculation of her response, the tension in the studio was palpable. The host shifted uncomfortably in her seat, sensing the impending clash. The audience, both in the studio and watching at home, could feel the heat rising, the anticipation building. Patel, riding his wave of self-assuredness, seemed oblivious to the gathering storm. He delivered what he likely thought was his most devastating blow, a personal anecdote framed to undermine Crockett's credibility. It was a calculated risk, a step too far. And in that moment, the calm on Jasmine Crockett's face gave way to a flicker, a spark of something far more powerful than anger. It was the quiet resolve of someone who had patiently waited for their moment, and who knew, with absolute certainty, that it had finally arrived. The air crackled with unspoken anticipation. What would she say? How would she respond to such a direct personal affront? The answer was coming, and it promised to be anything but polite. While still processing Patel's thinly veiled and condescending jab about her background, Congresswoman Crockett took a slow, deliberate breath. The rapid-fire energy that had been emanating from Patel seemed to dissipate as all eyes in the studio, and likely millions beyond, focused solely on her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't adopt an aggressive posture. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, her gaze locking onto Patel's with an intensity that seemed to cut through his practiced bravado. "Mr. Patel," she began, her voice calm and measured, each word enunciated with precision. "You seem to have made certain assumptions about my background, and while I won't waste time dissecting the obvious condescension inherent in your statement, I do feel compelled to address the substance, or rather, the lack thereof, in your arguments." She paused for a beat, allowing her words to hang in the air. The studio, just moments before, filled with Patel's booming voice, was now eerily silent. Even the subtle shuffling of papers from the production crew seemed to cease. "You speak of national security with such authority, Mr. Patel," she continued, her tone gaining a subtle but noticeable edge. "Yet your own record in positions of power is, well, let's just say it's a matter of public record and not entirely the glowing endorsement you seem to believe it to be." A slight shift in Patel's posture was now visible. The confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a tightening around his jaw. He likely sensed that the trajectory of the conversation had abruptly changed, and he was no longer in control. Crockett then proceeded to systematically dismantle Patel's arguments, point by painstaking point. She didn't rely on emotional appeals or personal attacks. Instead, she deployed a surgeon's precision, using facts, documented evidence, and direct quotes from his own past statements to expose the inconsistencies and, at times, outright falsehoods in his current narrative. She referenced specific instances during his tenure where his decisions had been questioned by bipartisan bodies, where his judgment had been publicly scrutinized, and where the very national security he claimed to champion had, according to numerous reports, been potentially compromised. With each carefully articulated point, Patel's composure visibly eroded. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting nervously between Crockett and the camera. He attempted to interject, to deflect, to return to his pre-prepared talking points, but Crockett, with a polite but firm hand gesture and a steady, unwavering gaze, held him at bay. "Please, Mr. Patel," she'd say calmly, "allow me to finish. I listened respectfully to your assertions. The least you can do is afford me the same courtesy." The silence in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. The host sat like a spectator at a prize fight, her initial shock slowly giving way to an expression of stunned fascination. The camera operators seemed to instinctively zoom in on Patel's increasingly uncomfortable face, capturing every flicker of doubt, every suppressed twitch of frustration. Then came the moment that would be replayed countless times, the moment that would solidify this exchange as legendary. After methodically dismantling his arguments on policy and subtly highlighting his questionable record, Crockett pivoted, her voice taking on a tone of quiet but profound conviction. "Mr. Patel," she said, her eyes locking directly into the camera, addressing not just him, but the millions watching. "You can talk about national security all you want. You can throw around buzzwords and try to intimidate with your self-proclaimed authority. But at the end of the day, the American people deserve leaders who operate with integrity, with transparency, and with a genuine commitment to the principles they claim to uphold." And frankly, she paused, the weight of her next words hanging in the air, "Your record speaks for itself." She then delivered the line that would instantly go viral, the savage comeback that left the audience in shock. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a personal insult laced with profanity. It was a calm, direct, and devastatingly accurate assessment that cut through the layers of his carefully constructed persona. It was a statement that resonated with a truth many had long suspected but few had articulated so powerfully on such a public stage. The immediate aftermath was precisely as described. Stunned silence. Patel sat frozen, his mouth slightly agape, as if the air had been knocked out of him. The host's expression mirrored the shock of the millions watching. For a fleeting moment, the only sound in the studio was the low hum of the broadcast equipment. In that silence, the power of Crockett's words reverberated. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a complete and utter deflation of the arrogance that had defined Kash Patel's public image. The hero's truth had landed its blow, and the villain's carefully constructed facade had begun to crumble. Live on national television. The silence itself spoke volumes, a testament to the unexpected and brutal efficacy of Jasmine Crockett's calm and calculated counterattack. The world held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The stunned silence in the studio was the last calm before the digital storm, before the host could even regain her composure and move the segment to a commercial break. The first ripples of the event had already hit the shore of the internet. The clip, isolated and powerful, was instantly clipped and uploaded across every platform imaginable. The caption was always the same, a phrase like "mic drop," "savage comeback," or "Kash Patel's face." The effect was instantaneous and explosive. Within minutes, the hashtag Jasmine Crockett was trending nationwide. It wasn't just a political hashtag. It was a phenomenon. On X, formerly Twitter, the clip was quote tweeted millions of times, each post adding a layer of commentary. Pundits and journalists who had been watching live rushed to their keyboards, their initial reactions of shock giving way to effusive praise for Crockett's composure. "This is how you debate," one prominent political commentator wrote. "Not with shouting, but with truth." A famous celebrity with a massive following simply posted the clip with a single fire emoji, and the post was liked hundreds of thousands of times. But the real power of the moment lay not in the reactions of the famous, but in the validation it offered to millions of everyday people. For every person who had ever been condescended to, talked over, or dismissed in a meeting, in a family gathering, or by a figure of authority, JasmineCrockett's.com/surgical takedown was a cathartic victory. The clip became a symbol. Memes began to flood the internet, superimposing Crockett's calm face over images of chaos and bluster. One popular meme showed her calmly sipping from a mug labeled "Facts" while an animated avatar of Kash Patel's face melted in the background. The shockwaves continued to spread. On TikTok, users created short-form videos with Crockett's audio, using it as a soundtrack for moments of personal triumph. They filmed themselves, calmly delivering a devastating truth to an unsuspecting opponent in their own lives, a boss, a relative, or a friend. The comments on these videos were a flood of personal stories. "This is what I wish I said to my manager," one user wrote. "She said what we were all thinking," another added. It wasn't just a political moment. It was a universal moment of dignity, triumphing over arrogance. The event even transcended the usual partisan lines. While many celebrated Crockett for her political courage, others, even those who disagreed with her policy positions, grudgingly praised her for her debating style. The contrast between her calm, collected demeanor and Patel's visibly flustered reaction was too stark to ignore. It was a raw, unfiltered display of character, and the public, tired of the usual theatrics, responded to the authenticity with overwhelming force. The ripple effect was powerful and undeniable. It confirmed that, in an age of loud, performative politics, truth still had the power to stop or remand a nation. In its tracks, the clip's virality was not just a passing social media trend. It was a statement, a collective roar from an audience that was hungry for substance and tired of bluster. And with this seismic shift in the public conversation, the stage was set for the final act, the moral lesson that would define the entire event and cement Congresswoman Crockett as a national figure who proved that dignity, in the end, would always defeat arrogance. The aftermath of Jasmine Crockett's stunning comeback was more than a viral clip. It was a mirror held up to a nation hungry for authenticity. The roar of the internet was not just in response to a clever retort, but to the deep, resonant truth at its core. This was not merely a political victory, it was a timeless victory of character. It was the triumph of dignity over arrogance, of truth over bluster, and of a lifetime of quiet perseverance over a fleeting moment of performative power. Kash Patel had come to the debate armed with the tools of modern punditry, condescension, deflection, and an unshakable belief in his own narrative. He assumed his position, and his loud certainty would be enough to win the day. But he was unprepared for the quiet strength of a woman who had spent her life not crafting a persona, but fighting for a purpose. Her response was not a pre-planned attack. It was the inevitable collision of a hard-earned truth with a fragile facade. In her calm demeanor and her surgical precision, she proved that you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to condescend to be respected, and you don't need to wield power to command authority. Her story is a powerful lesson for us all. It reminds us that our personal history is our greatest weapon. The challenges she faced as a public defender, the fights she waged in the legislature, they weren't just stepping stones. They were the forge in which her integrity was hardened. They were the lessons that taught her how to stand firm when others would waver. When she delivered her final, devastating line, it was not just a politician speaking. It was a lifetime of experience finding its voice. It was a testament to the fact that when you build your foundation on integrity and truth, no amount of bluster can tear it down. This is the deeper meaning of the moment. It's a story about what happens when the genuine meets the artificial. It's a call to arms for anyone who has ever felt silenced, overlooked, or told that their experience is less than. It's a reminder that your voice matters, and that your quiet strength is more powerful than any loud lie. It is a moment of moral clarity in a world that often seems to revel in chaos. So, where do we go from here? The lesson is not just to celebrate Jasmine Crockett, but to embody her resolve, to stand in our own truth, no matter how loud the opposition, to meet arrogance not with anger, but with dignity, to respond to bluster not with more noise, but with undeniable facts. Be part of this moment. Share this story with someone who needs to see the power of standing tall. Subscribe to our channel to be part of a community that values clarity, decency, and truth. Because as Jasmine Crockett proved on live television, a single voice, armed with conviction, has the power to change the entire conversation.